Today, we're diving into a topic. It's about broken promises, unfulfilled features, and a lack of communication from a company that many of us have trusted for years. Valve, who, if you don't know but you're watching this video, makes the Steam Deck, has a history of not delivering on their promises, or things being much later than people would like. There's even a common saying of Valve time to explain this. We've seen this before with games like Half-Life 2 Episode 3 that was promised and it just never came out. But there is a crucial difference between not delivering a new but announced product, so just canceling it, and breaking a promise on hardware that people have already purchased and are actively using. In one case, yeah, it sucks to not get something that I was looking forward to, but I didn't spend any money on anything. On the other hand, I spent money on trust and an expectation that is now broken. That is the situation that we're facing with the Steam Deck, a feature promised over 2 years ago that has still not come out. This isn't just about missing a release date. It's about functionality that some users were expecting when they bought the Steam Deck. For myself, I loved my Steam Deck. I even bought the OLED version as soon as it was announced. But this problem led me later to get the Legion Go, and for that to become my primary gaming handheld. So in this video, we're going to go through the timeline of events, look at Valve's statements, and discuss how the Steam Deck community handles this particular subject. Regardless of what side you fall on this particular subject, I hope you'll stick around and understand why people are upset. For those of you who have watched my previous videos, you might be able to guess what exactly we're talking about today. Windows support on the Steam Deck. Now, even if you don't care or even strongly disagree with running Windows on the Steam Deck, you should still care about promises being made to encourage buying a product, and then not following through on those promises or being very delayed. So we're not going to talk about the merits of running Windows on the Steam Deck. You can watch my other videos on that, but instead just focus on history and the facts and how we are now about 2.5 years after the Steam Deck started shipping, and we still have not received promised features with little communication. So let's go back to when the Steam Deck was announced in July 2021. Even at that point, they made it clear that this was open hardware and then you can install other operating systems. Now, at this point, I can't find anything about any official support, but it was clear that it would be possible if people could figure out how to make it work. Now, unfortunately, between the announcement and the release of the Steam Deck in February of 2022, I can't find any communication regarding Windows support beyond confirming that it would be possible. I have to imagine at some point they said something more concrete, but I just can't find it with a proper timestamp that I feel comfortable talking about. So if you know something more concrete, please let me know in the comments. About a month after the first shipments, in March, we got the first Windows drivers. We did not have all the drivers yet. Audio was missing, but for being a month later, I think this was great. We got the audio drivers in May, just about 2 months later. Honestly, I think that 3 months after release is perfectly acceptable for the non-primary operating system, given that they were also busy with getting a new product category out the door and making sure that SteamOS was working fine. Going back to the first batch of drivers in March, at that point, I can find the first concrete information about what Valve's support of Windows on the Steam Deck would be. Again, they might have said this earlier than March, but I can't find it. They said, and I quote, "While the Steam Deck is fully capable of dual boot, the SteamOS installer that provides a dual boot wizard isn't ready yet. This will ship alongside SteamOS 3 once it's complete." So, while they were not going to officially give support for Windows, they would make it easier to do so. And to be very clear here, this functionality was not necessary. The BIOS perfectly supports dual booting, but a custom bootloader and a partition tool would make it easier for most people. Personally, I imagine it would work something like Boot Camp that was available on Mac to install Windows. But this was a feature that Valve did not have to announce. It isn't strictly necessary, but they did. People bought it because they did, and we need to talk about that. At this point, I would wager that most people read this as SteamOS 3.0 being complete, meaning soon. You would not normally consider later major updates like 3.1, 3.2, etc. as making 3.0 complete. It is improvement and additional functionality, but 3.0 was complete as they intended it to be released. However, I think this is the first case of some misleading and carefully chosen words on Valve's case. Clearly, they're viewing SteamOS 3 as being complete when they moved to SteamOS 4. But That just isn't a normal way to view versioning of software. Let's look at macOS for comparison. OS X, or Mac 10.0, was released in 2001. Apple then released new versions of OS X until 2022 with 10.15. Those were complete versions of Mac with their own functionality changes that were then iterated on with minor revisions. For example, the last OS version under 10 with 10.15 was 10.15.7. Now, admittedly, the way that Apple did this was an extreme example that in 2023 they moved away from. But it would be absurd to say that each of these releases was not complete and that 10 wasn't complete until 10.15. So if Valve were to go a similar versioning convention, then saying this will ship alongside SteamOS 3 once it's complete could be 20 years from now. As it is, we're over 2 years from this, and the only communication I can find is them reaffirming that it is high on their list with the OLED announcement, and then some brief comments in August of 2024. If you know any other communication, please let me know in the comments so I can pin that. Let's move on with our timeline. November 2023, last year, they released the OLED Steam Deck. This was a fairly minor update except for the screen. I am struggling to find and remember an exact timeline, but from the best I can tell, the drivers were either available at launch or quickly after. However, again, not all the drivers were released. But this time more than just audio was missing. This time, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and audio drivers were all missing. There were some community efforts to find alternative drivers, but if you wanted to stick with official drivers, it was basically unusable. And even those community drivers didn't fix all the problems. Then, 9 months later, in August, we got another batch of drivers. An updated graphics driver, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and audio. But, except not. Because for some reason, those audio drivers don't work with the speakers. Meaning your only source of audio is Bluetooth headsets or plugged-in headphones. And well, now we're caught up to today. I'm recording this in August. We have received hit or miss communication about the future, and we still don't have fully working drivers for the OLED Steam Deck, and basically no communication about a supposedly high on their list feature. The situation with the OLED Steam Deck is really when I started seriously thinking about this video. I didn't really care about the dual booting functionality since not only do we have a solution for that from the community, but being able to boot to different partitions is pretty standard. I will fully acknowledge that you should never buy a product based on a promise. However, in the case of the OLED Steam Deck, I don't think it was unreasonable to assume that it would have a similar timeline to the original since we had not heard otherwise. And the hardware was very similar. Also, just because as a consumer we made a bad decision, that doesn't absolve Valve from breaking a promise either. Going back to why I was so hesitant to make this video, I've noticed that anytime this topic seems to come up, there are people that come out and say, you shouldn't have bought a Steam Deck for Windows, and you should have bought another device. They'll say SteamOS is better, or that Valve never promised these features. We should be grateful for the drivers we have, emphasizing that it is a Steam device meant to run SteamOS, or any number of reasons to shut down complaining about this. But from the beginning, Valve themselves have talked about the open platform, the ability to install other operating systems, and as I've already mentioned, they made promises that so far they've not kept. They even have a support document on their website saying this. If these features were not coming soon, they simply should have just not said anything. Let the community figure out dual booting the same way every other PC works. The worrisome part about this is that Valve is incentivized not to do this. While it is very possible to run games not from Steam on SteamOS, it is clearly focused on Steam games. For most users, it is going to be far easier to buy everything through Steam than to install a different store or use a subscription service, even if that means rebuying a game they already have. Once you go to Windows, there are no hoops to jump through to use those other stores, or possibly not even use Steam at all. And that alone is perfectly fine on Valve's side. If they want to make a device focused on Steam, they should be able to do that. But again, they talked about it being open hardware and talked about Windows working on it as an incentive to buy the hardware. And then when they don't deliver it, it looks a bit suspicious when you look at the business incentives of not doing what they promised. At this point, I strongly feel like we've been misled by Valve for what they were doing regarding Windows. Over 2 years to get a promised feature for easier dual booting. 9 months and counting to get all of the OLED drivers is not acceptable, especially with so little communication on the timeline of delivering these. And I understand that these things take time, and I don't expect these to come out immediately. But the current situation with promises just isn't right. If Valve is going to promise the ability to do this, then we need communication about when we're going to be able to do this, not some vague when SteamOS 3.0 is done, which, again, could be years from now. If they didn't want to do this in the first place, they should have never promised it. They should have left the community to figure out drivers and just said, good luck. But they didn't. They gave us drivers, and they made promises of features. I fully realize that I'm a small channel, and I doubt anyone from Valve is going to see this. But I want to be able to use the hardware that I bought in the way that I was told by Valve I would be able to. And I would like more communication on when exactly I can do this. Communication should be simple, even if the technical aspects are harder than anticipated. My point here isn't to advocate for Windows. It is to hold Valve accountable for promises made. If you made it here in the video, I hope that whether or not you care to run Windows, you at least agree with that simple statement. But now I want to hear from you. Did you buy a Steam Deck with the main purpose of being able to run Windows? Do you feel lied to like I do? Did you upgrade to the OLED thinking that at a minimum, it would have similar support to the original? And how do you feel that 9 months later, we still don't have Windows fully working? Or were you like me, largely gave up and bought other hardware? My OLED has been sitting in its dock for months, waiting for drivers. I didn't even turn it on until the recent drop of updates, and was super thrilled to find out everything is still not there. Let me know all of this in the comments. I have more topics regarding handhelds that I want to talk about, including more videos about the Steam Deck. I do think it's great hardware, so if you want to see those, hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.